Have you ever seen a billionaire in real life? If so, where was it and what was the situation? Story 1. My grandpa owned one share of Berkshire B for the thrill of attending the annual shareholder meeting, and he took me once when I was a kid. We lived maybe an hour from Omaha. More than just a typical business meeting, brands in the portfolio would hand out swag, and often they would bring chess grandmasters and Scrabble champions to occupy the shareholders as they idled about the event center. So there I am, 9 years old, playing Scrabble against the former world champion, when none other than Warren Buffett and his entourage of jerk kissers and press come strolling up. He came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders and asked the Scrabble champ, "Are you winning?" He was. Edit, Gramps might have owned A. I don't remember. I was 9. Story 2. I had a conversation with Bill Gates and didn't know it was him. I was a splicer for the phone company and was trimming his tree before I could do my work. He drove up and asked me what I was doing, and I told him it's the property owner's responsibility to keep trees off the utilities. I gave him a freebie and warned him that I'll be charging him for my time if I have to come back. He was cool about it and asked a bunch of questions about my truck, and we brainstormed ideas of how to get my bucket into a tight spot. He thanked me and wished me luck, then drove through his gate into his compound. This was in Medina Wa about 25 years ago. My coworker drove up and asked me what he said. I told him I had a friendly conversation with the property owner. He laughed at me because I didn't know I had just spoken with the world's wealthiest man. Story 3. I've known one for 30 years. He was merely kind of rich back then. Their lifestyle now is bananas. My kid was friends with a billionaire's kid. Never met the dad, hung out with the mother a bit. If you've ever seen the documentary The Queen of Versailles, it was like that. My hand to God, I would not trade places with any of them. There was so much dysfunction and sadness and anger in that family, my God. I hope the kids are okay, but we don't want to have any more contact with those people. Answer: yeah, I stayed one night at a mansion of a family that was at least close. It was a party meant to celebrate the new wing of their home, complete with movie theater. They served Dom Perignon all night, bottle after bottle. Next morning, my hungover jerk woke up and went in search of some water. Came upon the family arguing over every little thing. They were meaning at each other over everything imaginable from the night before. I've never seen such miserable bastards. Story 4. I used to play poker with one regularly. Super nice guy. One time I asked him about his FP Journey watch, and he just took it off and threw it across the table for me to look at. Just a $60K watch. No biggie. He's a great guy, though. Offered to help me get a job and stuff after I graduated college. Story 5. Met Ross Perot at a gas station when I was 16. I pulled into the station on fumes only to find out they only accepted credit cards after 9 p.m. I asked the driver of the next car if he'd charge 10 for me in exchange for my cash. Ross Perot rolled down the back window and chatted with me about where I was headed, why I was out so late, orchestra rehearsal, and about the orchestra program and my scholarship with them. Full tank of gas, 17, refused my 10 and donated to the program I was in on the condition my scholarship be funded for another year until I finished high school. The donation would have covered me for several natural lifetimes. Answer: I used to work for Dell Services, which used to be Perot Systems, before Dell later sold the division to NTT Data. Ross Perot still had an office in the building, and I'd regularly see him in the halls or eating in the cafeteria. Super nice dude. Always said hi to everyone. That building had hundreds of artifacts from his life decorating the halls. It was really neat. My favorite encounter was the time I overheard him chastising the dude at the mini Starbucks counter over the price of their cookies. Story 6. At a casino industry convention, the G2E, Global Gaming Expo, Canadian gentleman in his late 20s, early 30s. His father built the wealth through automotive parts manufacturing firms and casinos racetracks. The son was promoting a gaming idea using racetrack footage. The convention attracts lots of really rich people. I'm sure there were other billionaires there, but he was the only one I recognized. To his credit, he didn't have an entourage, was promoting the product himself, and really approachable. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about his product. He was very down to earth, excited about what he was doing, and a little on the nerdy side. It wasn't an act. For someone that rich, he was very nice and able to relate to people. Also worked for a financial services firm owned by Hank Greenberg and Eli Broad. Eli Broad seemed okay. Greenberg wasn't jerk, and his son was timid and afraid of him. His first official act after taking our firm over was cutting compensation for sales personnel, which prompted 20 of us to leave in, I think, 5 days. Hey, fudge those deadbeat guys who sell your product and make you your money, right? Needless to say, when the SEC and NY State went after him later for securities fraud, I was thrilled. Answer: Stronox. He owned it, Magna Auto Parts. His daughter eventually took it over. He was charged and convicted. I recall correctly on those charges. His son. They owned the largest racetrack in Canada, and their stable of racehorses were so high-end. Odd they would have been on the floor, but his son was not the same as his father or sister. Sister married, then divorced in Canadian MP. Story 7. My somewhat wealthy Phil bid on a vacation for 4 in some charity auction and won. He gave the trip to his 2 children and their spouses. It was a week-long trip to a privately owned island in the Caribbean called Palm Island. The second night it was pouring rain. We were at dinner and the billionaire guy who owned the island strolled into the dining room wearing a muddy white shirt and jeans and looking like a total bum. Everyone at the resort was talking shoot about him, how he had no respect for his customers and whatnot. We, who were not rich like everyone else there, kept our mouths shut. The next night we met him at the bar after dinner. My wife spent her entire evening talking with his wife because they shared similar anxiety disorders as well as issues with children. I spent the entire night talking with him about random life stuff. At one point, he did take a minute to apologize for his appearance the night before, as his cart had broken down during the rainstorm and he got out to push the cart through the mud so his wife didn't have to get dirty. I wish I could remember his name, but he let me know that while most billionaires are assholes, not all of them are. Story 8. Saw Warren Stevens, 1062 on the Forbes billionaire list, inside the new art museum he paid for here in Little Rock. He was a completely normal Southern man of a certain age. If I had not previously seen his picture, I would have not given this man a second look. He was that ordinary. Story 9. Our company was bought out by Vista Private Equity. Robert, who's the founder, chairman, and CEO, came over to our office. He delivered a quick speech, and he talked with us right after. None of the stuff he said stood out for me, but I was so fascinated by the fact that one person alone in that room, of about 100 people, owns so much money, $10 billion, all by himself. I couldn't believe it. My brain kept saying that this guy could just randomly give me $5 million and it wouldn't matter to him at all. That's like 0.05. That's like saying he has about 10 grand and all I need is $5. Now that I think about it, I was so overwhelmed that I missed out everything he said, LOL. Story 10. Yes, talked to Sergey Brin very briefly and realized what an idiot I sound like by comparison. Honorable mention, I had Larry Ellison in his car behind me on my commute home and thought about what an amusing conversation it would be if he rear-ended my car. Story 11. Yes, I worked at Dimensional. David Booth's company, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, was named for him after he donated $300 million to it. I saw him most every day around the office of what was maybe 400 people at the time. He had the front spot in the parking garage in IIRC, drove a Ferrari most days. He was there pretty much always. He seemed pretty well respected, and I never remember anybody talking badly about him. The office was an art museum, and his wife at the time contributed heavily to the arts. It's actually a really cool office, and I enjoyed working in it and really enjoyed most every coworker I had. Story 12. My child was in Scouts and I volunteered to manage his group during summer camp. Billionaire was my co-counselor. Spent a week with him taking care of 10-year-old kids. We had a blast. At the time, I had no idea who he was. I knew he was a prominent person because of the way he carried himself, but he was trying to hide his identity, and I frankly didn't care. At the time, I worked as a personal trainer for luminaries, so it wasn't a first. He was definitely an interesting person. His intelligence and EQ were striking. Best part was his sense of humor. We had a wonderful time together. Story 13. Mark Cuban quite a few years ago at BO's Steakhouse in Beverly Hills. He was sitting by himself at the bar the whole time. My friend said it wasn't him because why would a billionaire be sitting by himself, he said. I told him billionaires are allowed to be by themselves. Story 14. My previous firm I used to work at, we had Ivanka and Jared as clients. We discussed business matters, and I was just there listening and taking notes as associate. Never interacted, but after the meeting, my boss would always complain about how they always delay their payments to us and makes bullshit excuses. Story 15. I've met several and talked to a few. They vary from the guy doing a talk to my class about entrepreneurship in stained and ragged sweats, to tech CEOs, to my friend's dad who we got super stoned on plant substance from his personal grower while watching Walker and eating way too much pizza. Pretty sure I've eaten at a restaurant with some. We just moved to San Jose and our favorite restaurant is in a part of the area known as a hangout for the wealthy. Story 16. Yay, Jerry Reinsdorf. He was in a Bentley at a gas station fueling up across the street from a White Castle. He was in his car with the window down, eating a slider. So I pulled up next to him and said, "Hey, Jerry, nice ride. I'm saving up for one like that." He rolled his eyes and continued to eat. Story 17. I live outside of Bentonville. AR Walmart land. It's not uncommon to see members of the Walton family walking or riding bikes around town. One time I was telling my kid to get off of a sculpture along a walking trail in town, and this old woman said, "Oh, he's fine, don't worry about it." It was Alice Walton. I'm sure deep down they are incredibly weird and out of touch, but they do a decent job of coming across as mostly normal. The weirdest part is living in a real-life version of The Sims. Story 18. He showed up at my brother's New Year's party. My brother lived in a bougie little village with some big money houses that his butt up against. During construction, he made friends with the billionaire, and this guy would just show up randomly to hang out whenever he saw activity. My brother would always hope he would show up. This time he did, and for some reason he kept wanting to talk to me. Someone in his family invented some kind of cell phone technology. He invited me to fly with him the next day with a group to a rare game hunting preserve in Mexico with both an inside and outside chef. He had one seat on the PJ left for me, but I couldn't bring any bags. A part of me had the thought that I was the game for the hunt. It was easy for me to say no. I have no interest in hunting, and the rare game reserve element of it really kind of worried me. When I told him what I did for a living, I work in comedy, he said he was jealous because he just lost a close personal friend to boredom and that his kind of wealth isn't what it seems like. I said I'd like to take my chances. That's when he invited me to hunt. My brother and his friend were so jealous, and when I said no thank you, one of them literally turned and walked away. He was so upset. The billionaire saw this and still never invited them during the silence that followed. Never saw him again. My brother moved to another state before the next New Year's. Story 19. 10 years ago, I was a valet in college at a hotel in a smallish city in TN. One day, this guy walks by in an oversized polo and cargo shorts. I look at my coworker and was like, dude, that guy looked exactly like Gabe Newell. Everyone on the job was pretty bro-ish, so none of them knew what steam was or who he was. My coworker was like, meh. He checked in like 3 days ago. We've had Samuel L. Jackson, Usher, Jerry Seinfeld stay at the hotel before that everyone would talk about. I looked in the system and sure enough saw Gabe Newell's name as a guest. I was like, that dude that just walked by is a fudge billionaire. By far the wealthiest high-profile person to ever stay in this hotel. He blows every other celebrity that anyone's met out of the water. He was driving some shoe car, like a Ford Focus or something, tipping a few bucks each time. Sure enough, as word got around, everyone started meaning about how he only gave me a 5. What a jerk. But they had no problem with that before they knew he was a billionaire. LOL. Anyways, found out he sent his son to one of the boarding schools there, and that's why he was there. Saw him in the lobby a few times just sitting and chatting with his son, looking laid back. Seemed like a cool, down-to-earth dude. Story 20. Many moons ago, I met an older dude when I was upgraded to first class flying to Seattle. We ended up chatting the whole way and we started hanging out as friends. I didn't know anyone in the city as I took a job in tech. One day he invited me to a BBQ at his friend's house in Medina, WA. I said sure, had no plans. 2 guard shacks, and the house was on Lake Washington. Needless to say, the people I met were nice and welcoming, but wealthy AF. Story 21. Worked at Nike for a long time, and I got to cross paths with Phil Knight several times. Super normal guy, just a running nerd who had incredible business instincts, very polite and approachable, paid his respects every year to the Japanese bank that got him started by hosting them for a golf event. He even waited in line for coffee with everyone else at the campus cafe. Imagine how weird that was, standing in line behind one of the richest people in the world in a building he had built. The only special treatment I ever saw him accept. He had a reserved table at one of the campus restaurants. That seemed like a fair perk for him. Story 22. Several, and engaged in one-on-ones with many. There are really 2 categories. Some are just plain hubris it out and act like they are God's gift to mankind. Most, however, especially first generations who have built the businesses, are grounded, extremely hardworking, 16 to 18 hours a day are a norm, deeply thoughtful and risk-takers in a measured way. They truly value out-of-box thinkers and those who they can learn from, as their primary goal is to keep learning and improving and growing in life. I am self-made, though at a much, much smaller scale, and we have had deep conversations about value systems, next big opportunities, and what to do with life next. It is truly lonely at the top. Once you have their trust, you'd be amazed at how much they want to share. I also noticed that most of them married early and are one-person man-woman and that keep their personal life simple and allows them to focus on business building. Fun fact, many of the hubrised guys had a sad ending. One who showed me his plane had to escape regulators in it. Another who boasted about his score, 100, he was gross and eventually got caught in a scandal and lost everything. His wife knew everything and chose to stay with him BTW. The world of the super rich is strange. Story 23. I sold electric scooters in Austin during SXSW a few years back. These scooters cost about $2K, and people would typically test ride them for a while before even considering of buying it. A guy in a purple suit had his assistant come up to us and asked to buy one. We asked them if they want to test it, and they said no. We also advised people to say that it was a mobility device if they were getting on a plane with it. The guy in the suit said, "I have a private jet." We looked up his name after they paid, and his net worth was $8 billion, made mostly from his work in the prosthetics. Story 24. William Randolph Hart III and I had a nice conversation. Steve Jobs watched me demonstrate the Macintosh the day it came out back in January of 1994. Saw Bill Gates speak at the West Coast Computer Fair in about 1982. Thinking about it now, I'm not sure Gates or Jobs were billionaires at the time I saw them. Story 25. He was the primary shareholder and investor at the smallish company I was an executive at. We worked out of a small section of his main company's office. Our company had maybe 20 people at the time, in an office with maybe 500 people. He loved fitness, and the company had an amazing gym, but was small enough to be a fairly intimate space. We often used the gym at the same time. He loved my dog, who often came to work with me and hung out with me in the gym because he'd had a dog of the same breed. We were essentially gym bros and had typical gym bro conversations about sports, life, or whatever. We had a lot in common except for our net worths, of course. We never discussed work in the gym, and I never forced conversation. I think he appreciated that, because he clearly disliked it when people brought up business stuff or tried to force interaction with him in the gym. Honestly, sometimes it was just pathetic watching people try and get FaceTime with him in the gym. This lasted maybe 5 years. We worked out together probably a few hundred times. Our company eventually grew successful enough that we needed our own space in the city, so I no longer worked out at the main office. Never really spoke much after that outside of a few meetings. He mostly dealt with the CEO directly, who was my boss, but I always got the impression he made sure I was taken care of. He was, and probably still is, a nice guy. Loved his kids and wife, talked about them a lot, always seemed to try and do right by his employees and business partners. He was successful because of it. He definitely was a quiet leader type. Let his team take the lead. You could walk by him in the office and never really know him from some random guy in accounting or engineering. Story 26. Yes, the not-for-profit I used to work for was sponsored by a billionaire who made his money at a chemical company. One of the nicest, kindest men I have ever met. Didn't matter who you were, he always treated you with respect. He passed away a decade or so ago. Story 27. Not a billionaire, but I saw Kourtney Kardashian and Scott Disick at the airport in Cancun. Mason was only a few hours old, and no one recognized them but me. And I turned to my husband and said, "That is Kourtney and Scott." He turned to them, and then they turned to us with daggers, LOL. They did not want to be recognized, and I didn't even say it loud. We stayed at the same resort, and the nanny had Mason 100 of the time. It was an adults-only resort, so I am sure they paid enough to let Mason stay there. Story 28. I have met a few billionaires. One shares a love of cars and hockey. We talk often as he owns the company I work for. He also owns his own professional hockey team and knows my son plays. We'll ask every time he sees me how he is doing with hockey, asks us how we like his team and its amenities like the food and people there. We also talk cars, and I give him a hard time about being rich. He laughs. My work colleagues can't believe I just talked to him very openly and not suck up. I tell them he can have me fired for 0 reasons. And if that reason is a joke, so be it. Another has a decent Ferrari collection. We were talking about it one day. Next week he shows up and tosses me the keys to his 360 Challenge Stradale and says it's out front. Go check it out when you have a minute. Story 29. Yes, I was in 2 meetings with them. I must have said something they didn't appreciate, because when I asked the person who had invited me to the 2 meetings about the progress of the project and the likelihood of any future meetings, he responded as if I were a CIA agent whose security clearance had been downgraded. To add insult to injury, the suggestion I had made at the meetings I attended was the one the billionaire implemented. The most notable thing about the billionaire was that they were all numbers all the time. Nothing qualitative factored into their thinking at all. I have never encountered anyone as focused on raw numerical data in my work life. Not before and not since. I was very impressed by that trait, to be honest. I did also attend college with the musician daughter of an oil billionaire, but I never interacted with her. She was a year below me and studying a different subject. Story 30. I once worked with one. He wasn't one when we were working together, but his family was worth something like $4 billion back then. When we became friends, I never knew he was from money. I feel really fortunate to have gotten to know him like that first. We were at a party at his hotel room. He invited everyone back after we had attended a concert. It started to get loud, and I had a decent amount of party favors on me at the time. Then there was a knock at the door, and I got real vigilant BC of what I had on me. I thought we would be getting kicked out, like had happened so many times before. Nope, it was hotel staff letting him know that the people in the neighboring room had complained about the noise, so they moved them to another floor. Then they handed him a bottle of vodka or gin BC. They thought we must be running low. I was shocked. A girl I was talking with, and later dated for a few months, asked me, "Have you ever Googled his last name?" Google was like brand new back then. I said no and thought, why would I do that? Next day at work I did and learned a lot about his family. I was working the front desk at the time, and when he came into work, we chatted for a bit. And I was like, I didn't know your family gives out an architectural award. And he just smiled a little and said it was something his uncle did. He's now a billionaire for sure. And his family, at least his immediate family, and really most of the others I've met, are some of the nicest and kindest people I've ever known. Story 31. I'm friends with one, or at least was. 100 inherited, even though he grew up in a trailer park. Daddy made all the money and did a poor job at passing on the work ethic to the kids. Mad props to the dad for going from absolutely nothing to private jets and yachts. As for the kid I know, who is now 36, totally miserable and fat as fudge. It's actually really sad at this point. Story 32. Yeah, a few. The most memorable, because it was relatively low-key, was Tim Cook. Have to be grabbing Starbucks in Manhattan off Hudson St. by the old Western Union building. Saw a man that looked like Tim Cook sitting there, and there was a seat near him open. So I sat down, asked if it was him, and he confirmed. Chatted for a bit, then went on my way. Nice guy in the few minutes we chatted. Story 33. I've worked near a few, met a few. Most were nice and normal. Except Zuck is as weird as he seems and parks like a douche. His wife is a completely normal and nice person, and I honestly don't get how they're together. He acts like a toddler when he does something wrong and someone calls him out on it. Craig Newmark is very nice. Jack Ma's wife, Zhang Ying, is a riot. Jensen Huang really has dad vibes, and we talked about being bullied as kids for being Asian and how he made Hapa babies LOL. Ilse Pham Nhot Vuong is not a nice man, and him and his eldest son are creeps. He makes Viet people look bad and brings shame to the country. I hope people don't judge Viet people for him. Story 34. I was in a startup that went public. The founders became billionaires. It was strange because you knew that they were worth a ton of money, yet they were the same people that you came to work with on the day before. Good, solid folks, just as geeky as they were before the IPO. Most billionaires are billionaires on paper only. You can't really dump all of your stock and cash out. You are solidly well off for sure. Story 35. Tyler Perry. He paid near $1 million for my cousin's wedding at a lakeside palace in Italy. The man takes care of his people. He may or may not have started speaking in tongues when he took center stage with the microphone in the middle of the ceremony. Story 36. When I was a touring artist, we got hired to play for John Henry, hedge fund billionaire and owner of the Boston Red Sox, on his yacht a few times. I rubbed shoulders with execs from Johnson & Johnson and all sorts of people at those corporate events. We played the Core Club in NYC frequently, exposing us to the New York elite's nightlife. That was pretty interesting. I remember my friend and I talking to a man dressed in a white tux on the balcony one night at 2 a.m. My friend remarked how we would like to smoke a joint. We didn't have any, and the guy chuckled. A short time later, I asked what the man did for a living. Turns out he was the cop for Manhattan. I also knew the daughter of a real estate mogul who was very unassuming. You wouldn't know she was wealthy like that. One of my very close friends in college came from Major. His grandfather, total badass, was blowing up Nazi railroads at 15, got big into real estate, sold a bunch of land to the gov, and got mega rich. Again, you'd never even know it because he looked like a bum. He was raised not to flash or be irresponsible with his inheritance. They taught him financial responsibility early on, but their home's properties were insane. Story 37. Validated at a famous 5-star hotel in D.C. Some were genuine people. About 25 would treat you like a real person and have real conversations where they asked you about yourself. I imagine those are the ones who got lucky and are grateful or were born into it but raised sensibly somehow. Some threw money around like it was Monopoly. On checkout, Middle Eastern oil money types would walk through the lobby with a stack of 100s. Pretty much the entire staff would line up and they'd go down the line giving everybody a bill. Some, specifically Michael Jordan and Dan Snyder, were cheap as fudge. MJ smelled like booze, and Snyder was whiny and demanding, both apparently tipped in coins. Oprah would move all of the furniture out of her suite and brought her own in a moving truck and had lots of fresh flowers for her room daily. It sucked for the bellboys. I parked Diddy's Maybach limo, but didn't interact with him. If his car smelled like baby oil, I couldn't smell it over the plant substance. Oh, and Dave Chappelle was a really nice and down-to-earth. He smoked cigarettes on the side street around where the staff went to smoke. Story 38. I do a lot of poker runs on the boat at major lakes, and by extension, have become close to a lot of very affluent people. A couple of years ago, I was doing a Miami to Key West poker run with FPC, and before the run, a couple of us went to Southport Raw Bar in Fort Lauderdale, and some new people showed up. One of them asked if anyone wanted to take a ride down to Miami so he could go pick up one of his friends and then come back. So I said I'd go, thinking we were going to take the intercoastal via boat. No, instead, we took an Uber to his helicopter and flew down there. When we got back, we landed on his friend's yacht on Yacht Row outside our hotel. Find out the next day it was John Woodruff of the Coca-Cola family. Big ups to him. He lets us use his house in the Ozarks whenever we want now. Story 39. I once ran into Ted Leonsis in an elevator at the Capital One Center in D.C. before a basketball game. He's the owner of the Capitals and Wizards. I actually didn't realize it until someone pointed it out after he left the elevator. He was shorter than I expected, but well-dressed. I remember he had dress, casual shoes, and a sports coat on. He didn't say a word, just smiled when I looked at him, and then he got off the elevator. Story 40. I was in grad school at Stanford in the mid-2000s. We had a weekly seminar where people like Bill Gates and the Google founders would come in and give talks. It was a mandatory first-year course. I was drowning in coursework and would use the hour to do homework. Only thing I remember was Larry Page kept using the phrase solve search, which really annoyed me for some reason. Story 41. I've met a handful of billionaires when I worked at a luxury hotel in Rhode Island. Most of them were cool. Wendy Schmidt was the wealthiest, and she was a regular at the hotel, wife of Google CEO. She came into town to do philanthropy work, which is great, but my God, did I bend over backwards for her when she showed up a day before her reservation, and I was the only employee in the hotel when she showed up. Never tipped anyone a dime, and it made me pretty upset. Another guy was a big California real estate mogul, another regular who came with his family, had his staff fly in his sailboat and equipment a few days before he arrived. Always perfectly nice, and I enjoyed him. He got hit by a car while riding his bike in town, and I felt terrible. I didn't think he came back after that. Met Mr. Cho, the CEO of Korean Airlines. Had a whole security team with him, and it was a huge deal to have him show up, only for him to have to leave an hour after he arrived for an emergency. Almost met the Fanjul brothers. Actually, it might have just been Pepe Fanjul, and it filled me with rage that we were about to be hosting modern-day slaveholders. They run Domino Sugar Company, but they no-showed on their reservation. My favorite guest of all time was probably not a billionaire, I can't remember, but he was the former CEO of Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Georgia, and he was just the kindest rich guy I've ever met. Handed out $100 bills to everyone and would ask what you wanted from Starbucks every morning and would get you something random if you said you didn't want anything. Mumford & Sons, not billionaires, but total male body part. That's all I got. Story 42. I've known two billionaire families pretty well. One is totally normal, and unless you went to their houses or knew their super niche industry, you'd never know how much money they had. The other is from a long family lineage of money, and they're total asshats. Story 43. Yup, back in about 2009-ish, I was working on repairing automatic doors in the Seattle area. One night I got a call at about 11 p.m. to repair a door at Swedish Children's Hospital. I get there and start working on this really shoot-old cable drive Horton automatic door. If you know, you know. Anyways, there's this well-dressed dude who came out of nowhere and started watching what I was doing. Now, I was already pretty annoyed at being called out late at night to work on a piece of shoot door, so after a few minutes of watching me work, I turned to him and asked him if he needs help with something. He replied that he didn't, and he was just waiting for someone to come out of the hospital. All right, whatever. A few minutes later, he asked me to stop doing my work so the people he is waiting for could use my door. Well, shoot, I've got this thing all torn apart, and I've got this wicked sharp steel cable that I'm trying to disconnect but haven't yet. So now I gotta grab this frayed steel cable and hold it out of the way so the entry could be used. I had already been told that it wasn't going to be used prior to me starting working. I go ahead and grab the cable, and out walks Bill and Melinda Gates and their daughter, who looked like she had a leg injury from a soccer game. She was still in the soccer uniform. Turns out the guy keeping an eye on me was Bill's driver bodyguard. They walked out of the hospital through the door while I was on a ladder holding up this greasy, frayed steel cable out of the way. They loaded up and left. I finished fixing the door. Got some pretty decent scratches and pokes from the cable, but the overtime was good, I guess. Anyway, they seem like pretty normal people. Story 44. I was at a company dinner, and our then CEO came over and asked me to save the seat next to me. We had dinner, and he was funny, and tried really hard to teach me how to play blackjack at the casino night that evening. I was the receptionist at that point, so I really wasn't sure why he decided to hang out with me, considering so many other people were trying to schmooze with him that night. Maybe he just didn't want to talk shop, since I'm sure that's what a lot of people there were trying to do. But I was so intimidated, I really didn't have much to say. I do appreciate the time I spent with him, though. I wonder if a lot of them are just regular people, or if this dude was an exception. Story 45. I worked at a sporting facility stadium owned by the founder and CEO of an oil gas utilities company. He'd stop by from time to tour the place before events. Always nice, come around and say hi to us, see how we were doing. One time he needed some stuff moved around his garage, so they sent me and a few others over to help him out. His 30-car garage filled with classic luxury and sports cars. It was incredible. He saw me looking around and came over, a smile on his face. He asked me, "So, see anything you like?" Story 46. One of the Waltons visited a Walmart while I was working. It was weird because they made us strip hours in anticipation and then also demanded perfection. So all the salaried people worked like 100 hours for 2 weeks. Then after the visit, a bunch were fired. Guys seemed bored, TBH. I don't recall which one it was. Story 47. 22. Eastern Conference Finals, Heat, Celtics, whiteout in Miami, 12 rows from the court. I'm the only guy in my section wearing Celtics green. Then owner Wick Grousbeck walks down, taps me on the shoulder, extends his hand. I yell, "Mr. Grousbeck." We exchanged like we knew each other for 30 years. He says, "Thanks for coming out tonight." Needless to say, my section was horrified. Story 48. This was about 20-ish years ago. I worked in an IT managed services company for VC firms. I came in to up-level our service delivery, so I added in-person time with the founding partners. My first request from the senior-most partner, net worth 8B, was to help him get his new BlackBerry's Bluetooth to work with his new car. It was a bespoke Ferrari with a minimal console. I have no clue what I'm doing, but I guessed at how to initiate pairing and put 0 zeros in as the pairing code. The device links up with the car, making an escalating digital chime. He looks at me dead in the eye, wondering how I knew that was the trick. Without skipping a beat, I say, "I have one of these in yellow." "Heh," he responded, with an authentic smile. We got along great, and I got to see how that side lives. Story 49. My good friend's family is worth over 2 billion. They are the nicest people. I've known them for about 20 years, maybe a bit less. Her parents have always been so kind and welcoming, and when I brought my daughter to their house, they showered her with gifts as they don't have grandchildren of their own. Truly lovely people. Story 50. I knew a guy extremely well and was around him daily as he went from I can't make payroll to full-on billionaire with a private jet and a family office. His mother was an immigrant, and he very much started at the bottom. Wild ride. Got to hang out on the jet and see what the life of a billionaire is really like. Very interesting. Learned how to apply it to my life. Story 51. I met Princess Diana. I don't know what she was worth at the time. I was 11 and didn't ask, but she was married to the future king of England at the time, so I assumed cash wasn't her biggest problem. It was at the commissioning of a ship. Not much to say about it. Us kids were being little shoot, and she smiled at us. My mother was once ejected from a sailing event for throwing a beer can at the then Prince Andrew. That's a much cooler story now than it was then. Story 52. I work in the commercial seafood processing industry. The plant I work for is based in a tiny fishing village in SW, Alaska. We're a relatively small-scale operation when compared to some of the other heavy hitters in the area. Around 2010, we were purchased by a very large Canadian company that is privately held. The owner of said company actually flew out to our little outfit in the sticks to check things out after he purchased it. The man was already in his 90s at the time and apparently still worked a regularly scheduled 9-5 Monday and Friday work week. He arrived with a very large, doting and nervous crew of handlers who had a tightly controlled and scheduled itinerary for his time at our facility. The first 30 minutes or so went as planned. He met the office staff and HR, supervisors, department heads, etc. Shook everyone's hand, asked our names, how long we had worked for the company, where we grew up, and so on. Actually listened to what everyone had to say and seemed genuinely interested. To my knowledge, that is the one and only time that I've spoken with a legit billionaire. Once the introductory pleasantries were over, that's when the visit really got interesting. The moment he made his way down onto the processing floor, again with a team of probably 10 nervous pencil pushers and lawyer types, he immediately went off script and just started wandering around wherever his heart desired. He meandered through and around every department, between large moving pieces of equipment, behind forklifts, over and under production lines, just talking with whoever seemed interesting about what they were doing. He really had a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory type of wide-eyed wonder throughout. Remember, this is a 90-year-old billionaire basically running a Rube Goldberg campaign of his own design throughout a highly dangerous and unknown fish processing plant. His team were absolutely losing their fudge minds the entire time. It was goddamn hilarious. After the plant tour, he sat down in our mess hall and ate lunch with us. One of our kitchen staff, well known for her fearless sense of humor, came up to him while he was eating and asked if he would like to hear a joke. "Why, yes, I would," he replied, as his entourage, already visibly not impressed with our regular people food, shifted nervously in their seats. "Why do women make terrible carpenters?" Silence. "Because they spend their entire lives being told that this is 6 inches, she quipped, eyes squinting, holding up her thumb and index finger with less than a half-inch space between them. This man Fudge erupted into a fit of the most cartoonish, rich guy laughter I have ever heard. It was a pretty great time. Story 53. Many. I own a shop that deals with exotic cars. They are just like normal people. There are nice ones that you wouldn't even know are rich. There are assholes that you wouldn't know are rich. There are those nice ones and assholes that do act rich, but it's usually the ones who started off normal, then got lucky. Some of them would fight for a $50 discount. Some wouldn't ask for a discount, but pay to the exact cent, no under or over. Many of SoCMed rich are insufferable. They feel more important than others and are almost exactly how movies and show portray billionaires. One of my clients, an old rich billionaire car nut, would actually grab a wrench and start helping my people diagnose problems. Essentially normal people with more disposable income. Story 54. Sam Walton visiting stores several times. Very charismatic with the people he paid so poorly. Easy to see why he got it all going. True believer. Believed little people are little because they choose to be, and stepping on and over them was his right. Outwork you every day of the year. Story 55. See them all the time just walking around. NYC the best was George Soros just walking around Central Park wearing slacks, button-down shirt, and sweater. Not one person recognized him, noticed him. He was like a friendly grandpa type. Carolyn Kennedy walking the family dog at dusk. Again, not one person recognized her. Went to Graydon Carter's book party, Billionaires Galore. Mike Bloomberg, host, Barry Diller, etc., etc. You see them more often than not in NYC, and I don't even work in finance. Story 56. Mark Nunnally, Bain Capital, was a very close friend of our startup's CEO, and I saw him at many events and board meetings for our company. I was our CEO's chief of staff, and I remember Mark and his wife were both always exceptionally kind and genuine to me. They were the only people on that level that ever treated me like a human being. Others I met weren't billionaires but had hundreds of millions and were exceptionally rude, like would walk at a different cadence to avoid having to speak to me in a hallway kind of rude. Story 57. Yes, unfortunately, I can't give specific details for NDA reasons. I did work for several, however, one stands out, and he was super nice all the time. If you saw him or met him, you would never know he was in the Billionaires Club. He was very family-oriented and dressed sharply but casually. The only clues were his houses and his toys, classic cars, multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art smart home theater systems, etc. Story 58. How do you resist not being the next Luigi? I swear today I watched the CEO of Ford complain that the government is failing Ford because they don't have any more trade schools to supply labor for his company. I thought, why the fudge don't you fund trade schools? Almost broke my TV. I'm afraid of what I'd do if I was face to face with one of those guys. Story 59. Yes, Bill Gates came in through the cafeteria while I was eating a late lunch. There was some sort of robotics display or something happening at the time. He was still CEO of Microsoft, so it was quite some time ago and the details are quite fuzzy. He had his entourage around him, so nobody could get too near him. I finished my lunch and went back to work. Story 60. At the Chicago Motorcycle Show about 14 years ago, Sam Zell was there and we were both looking through a pile of motorcycle gloves trying to get the right fit. I noticed him but said nothing. We were about 2 feet from each other. If I were Sam, I'd want to be left alone as well. Bikers are bikers, regardless of how much money we have. Sam died a few years back from natural causes. It was broadcast in the news. I remembered that day in the Donald E. Stevens Convention Center. Story 61. 1. High school basketball game. His grandkid was on the other team. Again, many years later at shareholder meeting. 2 Tartar 312. Work. Founder of Fortune 500 company. His son and the CEO. CEO was called a billionaire in the newspaper, and he denied he was worth that much. Story 62. I had a fantastic conversation with Kimball Musk a few years ago. I assume he is a billionaire, at a brainstorming session on a program for inner city kids in Detroit. One of my most memorable interactions. Very passionate about what we wanted to do and in general about sustainability. And I wish we could have talked for 4 more hours. Not a fan of his brother right now, but have a high opinion of him. Story 63. I graduated from college 20 years ago. I Googled an acquaintance this year that I went to college with. During college, he was always talking about how his plan was to work on Wall Street after college. Well, I Googled him this year, and he has his own Wikipedia page and is a billionaire. He received large amounts of investments for a robotic company that he is working on building. The robots actually look pretty basic compared to robots from other companies that I have seen. Story 64. I used to work for the owner of a large retailer. I was in charge of facilities maintenance for the stores, distribution centers, corporate offices, and even the owner's house. I was in his office a lot, and we would exchange greetings when we saw each other around town, even after I left the company. Multi-billionaire. Story 65. Had one as a client back in the day. Fortune 100 tech guy. Dude could make a phone call and make stuff happen on a level I'd never seen before. Subdued sense of style, but everything was meticulously scheduled and top of the line in a way that made most wealthy people I had worked with seem hungry for attention and relatively poor. Story 66. I worked in finance in SF. I had a guy take me to Cypress Point for golf, where he is a member. He was considered the grandfather of venture capital in the Valley. A legend in tech. He was literally hanging over the ocean trying to save his ball from being lost. I'm like, WTF, it just doesn't matter. Story 67. Had dinner with him, a friend of good friends of ours, nice guy, totally normal, down to earth, wouldn't think that he had 1 billion for sure. He just looked like anybody's accountant, wearing Tevas, shorts and a polo shirt, drove a classic Plymouth Fury. Story 68. I tried to get on my usual subway car during my morning commute at Bowling Green Station in Lower Manhattan. I was unexpectedly blocked by a human brick wall in a black suit with sunglasses and an earpiece glaring down at me. I got in at the other end of the car. I saw the then Mayor Bloomberg sitting in my regular spot, surrounded by more security guards. He was apparently heading to the arena at Atlantic Terminal. Story 69. Used to work for Fidelity Investments and was a lowly manager on their trade floor. Abby Johnson would come by for visits to talk with site leadership and do her usual photo ops. I was eating lunch in a secluded part of the building, and she walked past and made quick eye contact and snickered at me while walking past, literally with a look at this peasant smirk. The times I've seen her give talks or do town halls, I got the sense she's slightly slow in the head because she sounds super scripted or she's learned to defer questions to her other C-suite folks. Story 70. I worked at the hockey shop at Chelsea Piers in NYC, and at the time the RNC held their convention there, Bloomberg held a gathering for the mega-rich there. I got thrown up against a police car because they thought I was a protester. When they finally figured out that I was telling the truth and I worked there, they told me I should have been more careful. Story 71. I peed next to Richard Branson in the bathroom at Heathrow. I watched him in a mirror as he left. He washed only the 2 fingers that touched his male body part and then dried. Only the 2 fingers on the pull-down towel rotating thing. That man is efficient. No wonder he's so successful. Story 72. I used to work for a company that wraps exotic or very high-end cars. Talking Pagani, Bugatti shoot here. The fudge you money. Nice people, though. At least, when it comes to cars and car people, it doesn't matter how much you have to spend. You can sit and talk cars all day. Story 73. I was in Sea Scouts and racing 420s. We entered the William Rushton Koch International Sea Scout Cup boat race and went to Miami to race. Visited his mansion and ate dinner in his yard. Edit. Also attended trade show for pharmaceuticals and met some pharma bigwig when I was working for my dad. Story 74. I used to do corporate video like product announcements, retreats, and annual sales conferences and such. On the road, so worked with lots of them, mostly in the tech sector. Ellison, Jobs, Buffett, Gates, Ballmer, Michael Dell, Ross Perot, Gordon Moore, probably a bunch more I'm forgetting or maybe didn't even realize they were billionaires at the time. Story 75. Yes, Warren Buffett multiple times. It was really stupid because everyone was walking on eggshells around the dude. It's no wonder these people all end up being megalomaniacs with how people react to them. Context is that I worked for a major furniture retailer whose owner knew Warren because Warren owns Nebraska Furniture Mart, and he borrows a lot of business tactics and info from my old boss. So every time Warren was in town, there was always a big to-do about keeping the warehouse clean and being on your best behavior. Also, the current owner of my employer is a billionaire. Totally wouldn't expect it. Looks like a total hillbilly. Just wears a t-shirt and dirty jeans every day. Used to come around the IT department and talk shop with all of us nerds because he was getting into using a Raspberry Pi to custom build a watering controller for all his gardening. Story 76. I served John Cusack once. Not a Billy, but a Millie, and I fudge up his order. He ordered the salad and chicken. I was so nervous I thought he wanted the salad add chicken. He wanted the salad first, then the chicken entree special. When I figured out the miscommunication, we were out of the chicken special mayo. He was a little strange, but not rude. I think he tipped normal, which understandable because I fudge up his order. Went out after with my coworkers like we usually do and had a couple drinks. Then when I got home, Serendipity was on. Literally, as I walked in, it was playing on the TV. I leave my TV on for my dogs. This was like 2019. I shoot you not. What a day. Story 77. I worked for a man who was the son of a billionaire. He started a company as a pet project, basically to fuel his ego. I can't imagine why else he did it because he was stupidly rich and had everything. The guy was totally maniacal and arrogant. One time he dressed up as Michael Jackson and put on a whole show for the company. It was definitely a WTF moment. He would go around randomly firing people. He would come up with insane ideas that would fail immediately. Hired a bunch of his rich idiot friends to sit around and fake meetings all day. That company shockingly lasted about 4 years. It was a weird experience. Story 78. My husband was a personal driver for one, and he would take him to meetings at restaurants and hotels and things, and I would meet them there to spend time with him since we had just started dating, and we goo gaga for each other. So I ran into him a whole bunch. He was very, very friendly and genuinely was a pleasure to be around. Always remembered what was going on in my life and asked about things I would tell him previously. Story 79. An extended family member is one of 8 pilots for a billionaire in Chicago. 10-ish billion net worth. Met him at the airport for a tour of his jet with my uncle. Super nice guy. Wore blue jeans and didn't drive anything too flashy. His wife, on the other hand, took weekly trips to London to go shopping for the day. Story 80. Tori Amos concert in Seattle in the early 90s. It was Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen sitting a row in front of me, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand to hand to Tori after the show. We all waited for her to come out. Paul's with his wool cap and pocket protector didn't say a word to anyone, just boyishly waited for nothing. Just like the rest of us, except we didn't have his billions. Story 81. The founder of a well-known food company donated funds to the nonprofit I work at. It was a large donation, and he and a few of his senior team came to our office to deliver one of those giant ceremonial checks. He showed up in jeans and a faded t-shirt and well-worn hat. A bit scruffy with that facial hair. He was so down to earth, friendly, warmly shook every employee's hand and looked them in the eye, trying to remember as many of our names as he could. Story 82. We were a middle-class Canadian family, but my grandparents paid for a summer study program in Barcelona when I was 17. Pretty much everyone there was loaded, but one girl in particular was the daughter of a Russian politician. I loved spending time with her. She was surprisingly down to earth. One thing that made me a little sad was that she was worried about gaining weight that summer and how her mom would punish her for it. That was way outside of my life experience. I Googled her when I got home, and her family is worth billions. Still are. Story 83. I was at the Golden Nugget in Lake Charles, Louisiana. There was a big yacht with a helicopter. So I Googled the name, and turns out it was Tillman Fertitta, the owner of the joint. Then he walked by with a group of people. Not really an exciting story, but it meets the criteria. Story 84. I met Elon Musk on the set of the first Aquaman. He was very nice and a bit awkward. He was hovering around Video Village and didn't want to sit in any of the director's chairs. He was there to hang out with Amber Heard, even though they weren't dating. After a week or so, we were all like, why is he still here? Doesn't he have something to do? Story 85. Dave Rubenstein regularly shows up in the upper levels of Camden Yards to shake hands and throw out hats and shake hands. Does that count as meeting him? Not sure. But go the sake of this post, it'll say I met him. I watched him talk to everyday people the whole time. He seems to be very grounded. Story 86. Yes, I met and interviewed Bill Gates back in 1992 when Microsoft bought Fox Software. I had about 5 minutes with him. At the time, he was worth $6.3 billion. I wanted to turn him upside down and shake home for loose change, which probably would have amounted to several $1,000s. Story 87. I once had dinner with Randy Rissman, founder of Tiger Electronics and inventor of the Furby. Not sure he's a legit billionaire, but he's got fudge you money to spare. He talked a lot about ridiculous expensive vacations like it was everyone's experience. Like why would anyone go on a group safari when they could have a private mansion inside the grounds and get the full experience? He wasn't a bad guy, just clear he lost touch with common reality a while ago. Story 88. Unsure if billionaire or just a few hundred million. I worked at a relatively high Marriott hotel. At the time they had platinums, people who stayed 75 nights a year at Marriott's, very common. Platinum Premier, top 2 point earners. Saw about 5-10 of those a week. Still not very impressive, though they'd think a lot of themselves, my father-in-law included. Then there were Platinum 5 stars. So secret not even my father-in-law knew they existed. In over 10 years at full service, Marriott front desks, I only ever met one. This rank of rewards member was by invitation only by Mr. Marriott himself. This guy was on the board of directors for Pepsi and Marriott, etc. He was in town for a college basketball tournament that fed into the main NCAA tournament. He was unremarkable. I also met Bianca Jagger, Mick Jagger's ex-wife, at a high-end hotel when I was in college. She was nothing special but just had an aura about her that everything was beneath her and unimpressive. Her assistant was nice enough, but I remember just thinking that Bianca was above everything at the property and no idea why she was there. Story 89. Peter Seidler, owner of the San Diego Padres, and Irwin Jacobs, founder of Qualcomm. Both extremely nice, humble guys. I met Peter on the field before a Padres game. He had cancer but was extremely friendly to everyone and the players. San Diego loved him. R.I.P. Peter. I've met Irwin multiple times. He did a ton of philanthropy at UC San Diego Engineering. He was one of the first tech giants, no bodyguards or anything, but he was a nice, humble man who knew my dad as an accountant when he was a professor in electrical engineering. My dad fudged up so bad not investing in his company. I also met the Kardashians in Las Vegas in the Venetian randomly, but this was in 2007, so they were just popular. Chloe and the mom were extremely nice. Kim was on the phone the entire time. So kind met her with just a handshake. Story 90. Have seen Elon Musk multiple times at the Tesla factory in Fremont, California. He used to go there in person periodically for meetings and do a quarterly all-hands meeting. Once, I saw him come out of a conference room and nobody else was around. He unfortunately seems to have stopped going to Fremont or goes there infrequently nowadays. Story 91. Bill Gates used to have a lunch party at his house with the year's batch of interns. I was an intern in 2003, so I got to hang out on his lawn and have a quick chat. We had to change buses and go through a security scan on the way there. I thought I was super cool for asking about Linux. Story 92. I saw Elon Musk and Jon Favreau in the lobby at the Grand Californian Disney Hotel about 10 years ago. They were waiting for their VIP host to arrive and had about 5 or so kids with them. Nobody really seemed to even notice them, but it was a bit before Elon became a big public figure. Story 93. I've seen Michael Jordan twice, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs, Mark Cuban, Rihanna, Oprah. I was still AD and doing honor guard when Trump visited Lackland, if that counts. The others were mostly promoting something at the time. Steve and Tim were over the course of time when I worked at Apple. Tim again at a store in Chicago during the Vision Pro circuit. MJ was at one of his b-ball camps in the early 10s, nephew-in-law. Story 94. I was working in the bathroom of his private hangar. I found myself laying underneath his urinal and questioning my life choices. But then I noticed something that humanized him. The little dried yellow rivulets running under the porcelain rim reminding me that even this man, despite all his power among men, misses sometimes. He himself came off as aloof. He would stand at the edge of the room with the 24-hour news on and half look at the TV and half look outside and half look at his phone, and when I would address him, he would half acknowledge me. I imagine that for someone with such influence in the world, he must always have his radar set to mediate the relevance of all potential info streams, which might explain why he was unable to attend very carefully to his own. Story 95. My father-in-law and his siblings went to school with the children of Stuart Resnick, who founded the wonderful company. He and his wife have somewhere between 5-10B. My wife's family has remained friends with the Resnicks, and I've met them a few times. Story 96. There's approximately 800 billionaires in the U.S. I've seen a couple while doing professional corporate security. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. But I've never shared a wall of urinals or anything. But who knows, maybe I've rubbed shoulders and didn't even know it. Story 97. One night, I was super coked up, drinking with a buddy at a mid-sized private event. One of the guys in the 5-person VIP section was a bit of a local celebrity that my buddy knew because he was friends with this guy's son. Everybody used to quote his commercials because they were pretty genius. His whole shtick was something like, if you buy a new or used appliance, you get a free onion. Very odd marketing strategy, but it worked out for him. Anyhow, we go hang out in the VIP section, and I was talking to this very unique-looking man. I was pretty tipsy, so I was laughing, cracking jokes. We were having a lovely time enjoying the music. This gigantic mountain of a man comes up behind me and says, I know you're tipsy and having a good time, but please don't put your hands on Mr. Khan. I was caught off guard, and I turned around and became very agreeable to whatever this creature needed. I said, for sure, man. Also, who is Mr. Khan? Turns out the gentleman that I'd been schmoozing with was Shahid Khan, owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, father to Nick Khan. I was instantly the biggest Jacksonville Jaguars fan in the world. In reality, I'm a diehard Chicago Bears fan, but not that night. I was hyping up Blake Bortles, who they just drafted 3rd overall, layering in Jaguars facts and stats to prove my lie. He was so impressed with my fanship that he told me he'd fly us out to Jacksonville for training camp on his plane, let us watch from his box, etc. But he forgot to give me his number, so I'm sure he's just waiting for the right time. Also, that's one of my craziest drinking stories and one of many, many reasons that I don't drink anymore. I'm sure that I was obnoxious, but he didn't turn down the party favors I brought. So, meh. Story 98. I grew up in San Francisco and went to private school with famous people's children and grandchildren. The big ones I remember were grandparents that we'd see every so often over the years. In my class, it was the Fisher family. In my sister's class, it was Schwab. And nowadays, it's Joe Lacob at Warriors games. Story 99. I am the manager of the private resort for one. He calls me all the time. He's just an old dude who got into buying real estate at the exact right time, worked hard, made billions. Now he has a little mountain resort I run as a hotel most of the year, except for 2 weeks when we close. He flies his family in from all around the world, and they party. It's weird as fudge to have a billionaire calling you all the time, though. Story 100. I work at a hotel in Beverly Hills. There was a period of time in the summer of 2014 when we had 10 billionaires in-house at the same time. In addition to those, there are probably another 15 you've crossed paths with. Of those 25, there are several anybody here could name, and a few probably nobody here has ever heard of. Story 101. Literally was in the same bar as 3 of them at the same time about a month ago in D.C. Sat across from Jamie Simon, Josh Harris was a few booths over, and Alex Karp was at a table behind us. Not sure what was going on that night, but it was a surreal experience. Story 102. I worked at a Liz Murdoch startup. She has many, and she was very approachable. Took the staff out for beers whenever she was in town. Always a good time. She sent great gifts. I read once about the clothes that the Roy family wore in succession. No big labels, always perfectly tailored. Just looks expensive. Same thing, radiating bespoke energy. We never discussed the rest of her family. Story 103. Growing up in West Texas, there were lots of billionaires, but you wouldn't know it from how friendly they were, and they drove regular pickup trucks and lived in a modest house. There is a billionaire in my current town who lives a few blocks away from me. I see them on walks and stuff. Very normal humans. Story 104. I probably have given I used to run in a lot of political circles that were the pet interests of a couple billionaires, including events they popped in on, but I never once approached them or even really noticed them. I was always focused on other stuff and didn't have time to look at someone with a few more zeros on their net worth. Story 105. I'm in Northwest Arkansas, and I've been within a few yards of 2 of the Walton grandsons, Tom and Stuart. I've been in the same room as John Tyson of Tyson Foods. Same for John L. Hunt, the widow of J.B. Hunt. I was at a college football game in the 13th row, and Jerry Jones walked in front of us on the field. He was there for a ceremony. We have quite a few billionaires in this little metro area. Story 106. I worked at a domestic violence program in Maryland. One of our biggest supporters was a very nice woman, Mitzi Perdue. Very unassuming woman, dressed well, but not outrageously so. Always a nice bag and shoes. She was always the nicest to everyone, from staff to the victims. Not only was she married to the late Frank Perdue, the old guy from the Perdue chicken commercials in the 90s, she was also the heiress to the Sheraton Hotel fortune. Estimated net worth $22 billion. Story 107. I was the soccer coach for Phil Anschut's grandkid about 16 years ago. He would bike into games with full-on cycling gear, helmet, and biker shorts. But he would hang out away from all the parents and watch the game from a shaded tree. Every once in a while, I would nod,